The sound of a basketball bouncing against the driveway echoed through the still evening air, accompanied by bursts of laughter. I stood by my window, the blinds drawn just enough to let me peer outside. Adam was there again, his athletic frame silhouetted in the amber glow of the streetlight as he and my neighbor's younger brother shot hoops. It was ridiculous how often I found myself watching him. It wasn't just his confidence, though, that certainly had its appeal. There was something else about Adam, something quieter, more magnetic. He had this way of commanding attention without trying, of drawing people in with a smile that could disarm you in seconds. I tore myself away from the window, shaking my head as I grabbed my coffee cup from the counter. This was becoming a bad habit, but I couldn't seem to stop. There was something about Adam that made it impossible to look away. My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a text from my neighbor, Jake. "Jake, can you help Adam with the cabinet? I'll owe you one." My stomach flipped. I set the cup down carefully, my hand suddenly unsteady as I stared at the message. Helping Adam? Alone. I typed a quick response to Jake, my fingers trembling slightly. "Sure, no problem." The message sent before I could overthink it. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my shoes and stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. Adam was still outside, leaning casually against Jake's car, his arms crossed as he watched me approach. The soft glow of the streetlights caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look even more striking than usual. "Hey," he said, flashing me that effortless smile. "Thanks for helping out. Jake had to run, and this thing's too heavy for one person." "No problem," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. I hoped he didn't notice. "What are we moving?" "A cabinet," Adam said, gesturing toward Jake's garage. "It's already in the house, but it needs to go upstairs. It's awkward as hell, so—" "Yeah." I nodded, following him into the house. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint scent of pine and something earthy, probably Adam's cologne. The cabinet stood by the stairs, a bulky piece of furniture that looked like it had no business being moved by two people, let alone into a narrow hallway upstairs. "We've got this," Adam said, gripping one end of the cabinet and flexing his arms slightly. I tried not to stare. "Just lift on 3. We maneuvered the cabinet toward the staircase, our arms brushing occasionally as we worked. Each accidental touch sent a jolt through me, my focus wavering as I tried to concentrate on the task. Adam was completely composed, as if the proximity meant nothing to him. It was maddening how effortlessly he carried himself. "Careful," he said as we reached the first step. "It tilts if you don't hold it steady." "Got it," I mumbled, gripping the edge tighter. My palms were already sweating, but not from exertion. The climb was slow, each step a careful dance to avoid dropping the heavy piece of furniture. By the time we reached the top, my arms ached, but my heart was racing for an entirely different reason. "Let's set it here," Adam said, nodding toward the far wall of the upstairs hallway. We lowered the cabinet carefully, the wood scraping lightly against the floor as it came to rest. Adam let out a sigh of relief, leaning back against the wall. His shirt clung to him slightly, the faint sheen of sweat along his collarbone catching the light. "Not bad for two guys who don't move furniture for a living," he joked, running a hand through his hair. His gaze met mine briefly, and for a moment the air between us felt charged, heavier somehow. "Yeah," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I glanced away, hoping he wouldn't notice the heat rising to my face. But he did. Of course he did. "You okay?" Adam asked, stepping closer. His tone was light, but there was a flicker of something else in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even concern. "Yeah, fine," I said quickly. Too quickly. He tilted his head, studying me. "You sure? You seem distracted." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Just tired, I guess. Long day." Adam didn't look convinced. He moved a little closer, his voice dropping slightly. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're avoiding looking at me." I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Was he teasing? Or had I been that obvious? "I'm not avoiding anything," I said, but the words felt hollow, even to me. My gaze flickered up to meet his, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. He said, his lips curving into a slight smirk. "If you say so." The silence that followed was thick, the kind of silence that feels louder than words. I should have said something, anything to break the tension, but I couldn't find my voice. Adam's gaze lingered on mine, and for the first time, I thought I saw something in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. "You're quiet," he said softly. "Not like when I've seen you with Jake." I shrugged, forcing a small smile. "Guess I'm just not great with new people." "New people," he echoed, his brows lifting. "I've been around for months." "Not like this," I admitted before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Adam's smirk faded, replaced by something softer, more thoughtful. He stepped back slightly, leaning against the wall again, his arms crossed. "Fair enough." The tension eased slightly, but it didn't disappear entirely. It lingered, hovering between us like a thread waiting to be pulled. I shifted awkwardly, my gaze dropping to the floor. "You don't have to be nervous around me, you know," Adam said, his voice quieter now. "I'm not as intimidating as I look." I let out a breathless laugh, the sound more nervous than I intended. "I'm not nervous." He didn't reply immediately, but when I looked up, his gaze was steady, unwavering. "If you say so." We stood there for a moment longer, the silence stretching again. Finally, Adam pushed off the wall, his movements slow and deliberate. "I should probably get going. Jake'll want an update on the cabinet." "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." He paused as he reached the top of the stairs, glancing back at me. "Chris?" "Yeah?" His smile was faint, almost hesitant. "Thanks for the help." Before I could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing softly as he descended the stairs. I stood there for a long moment after he left, my thoughts a tangled mess. The air felt different now, charged with something I didn't fully understand. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Adam knew exactly what he was doing. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I tried distracting myself, scrolling through my phone, flipping through channels on TV, but Adam lingered at the edge of every thought. The way he looked at me, the subtle tilt of his head as if he could see straight through me. I told myself I was imagining things, reading too much into moments that meant nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. By the time I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion pulled at my body, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, leaning against the wall, the faint smirk on his lips, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. My chest tightened at the memory, and I turned over, trying to will the thoughts away. It didn't work. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Squinting against the bright light streaming through the curtains, I reached for it. A text from Jake. "Jake, you busy today? Adam needs a hand with something else." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart sinking and racing all at once. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to make up some excuse and avoid another interaction like the one we'd had last night. But the other part, the part I didn't want to admit, was louder, more insistent. I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. "Sure. When?" Jake replied almost instantly. "Whenever you're free. He's at my place now." I dragged myself out of bed and into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the remnants of a restless night. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my thoughts kept circling back to Adam. The way his presence had filled the room, the way his voice carried just enough warmth to make my stomach twist. By the time I made my way over to Jake's house, my nerves were in overdrive. The front door was unlocked and I stepped inside, calling out, "Jake!" "Not here," came Adam's voice from the kitchen. The sound of it sent a jolt through me, and I took a deep breath before heading in. He was standing by the counter, a mug of coffee in hand, his hair slightly damp as if he'd just showered. He looked up as I entered, offering a faint smile. "Morning," he said. "Thanks for coming." "No problem," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's the project this time?" He set the mug down, gesturing toward the backyard. "Jake bought some new patio furniture. Thought it'd be fun to leave me to deal with it." I followed him outside where several large boxes sat stacked near the deck. The air was warm, the faint hum of cicadas filling the silence as we got to work. Unpacking and assembling the furniture was straightforward, but the proximity to Adam made it impossible to focus. His voice, his movements, even the occasional brush of his hand against mine, it was all too much. At one point, as we struggled to align a stubborn piece, our hands collided. I pulled back quickly, mumbling an apology, but Adam just chuckled. "It's fine," he said, his tone light. But when I glanced up, his eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. We worked mostly in silence after that, the tension between us thickening with every passing minute. By the time we finished, the sun was high in the sky, and sweat clung to my skin. Adam grabbed a couple of bottles of water from the cooler and handed me one, his fingers brushing against mine as he did. "Thanks," I said, avoiding his gaze. He didn't reply, taking a long drink before leaning back against the patio railing. The sunlight caught the lines of his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat on his neck. I looked away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. "You've been quiet," he said after a moment, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, too quickly. "Just tired." He tilted his head, studying me. "You sure that's all?" I froze, the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. There it was again, that knowing look, as if he could see every thought I was trying so hard to hide. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Really?" Adam didn't push, but the way he looked at me made it clear he didn't believe me. He set his water bottle down, stepping closer until he was only a few feet away. "You're not very good at lying," he said softly, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Has anyone ever told you that?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not lying." He took another step forward, his movements slow, deliberate. "If you say so." I wanted to move, to step back and put some distance between us, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. The air between us felt electric, every nerve in my body on high alert as Adam stopped just in front of me. "Chris," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do I make you nervous?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt dry, my pulse racing as his gaze held mine. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until I finally managed to shake my head. "No," I lied. His smile widened slightly, but there was something softer in his expression now, something almost tender. "Good," he said quietly, "because you make me nervous." The confession hit me like a punch to the chest, and for a moment all I could do was stare at him. Adam, confident, self-assured Adam, was nervous. Because of me? "I don't believe you," I said before I could stop myself. He laughed softly, the sound low and warm. "It's true," he said, his eyes searching mine. "You've been in my head since the first time we met, and the worst part is, I don't think you even realize it." The world seemed to tilt slightly, the weight of his words pulling me under. I wanted to say something, to ask him what he meant, but before I could find the words, he closed the remaining distance between us. His hand brushed against mine, hesitant at first, as if waiting for me to pull away, but I didn't. I couldn't. And when his fingers finally curled around mine, the warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. "Tell me to stop," he said softly, his voice trembling just enough to betray the confidence in his words. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the gap between us, my lips meeting his in a kiss that was hesitant at first, then deepened as months of unspoken tension spilled over. His hands cupped my face, his touch both gentle and firm as he pulled me closer. The world around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the warmth of his skin, the taste of his lips, the quiet hum of the connection we'd both been too afraid to name. When we finally broke apart, our foreheads resting together as we caught our breath, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't fully name. Relief, longing, fear. "This changes everything," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Adam smiled, his thumb brushing lightly against my jaw. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The weight of what had just happened settled over me as I stood there, Adam's forehead still pressed against mine. My heart raced, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and longing. His hands rested lightly on my shoulders, his touch grounding me even as my mind threatened to spiral out of control. "I didn't plan for this," Adam said softly, his voice breaking the heavy silence between us. His tone was steady, but there was an edge of vulnerability that I hadn't heard before. "But I'm not sorry." I swallowed hard, his words cutting through me like a blade. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Adam pulled back slightly, his gaze locking onto mine. His eyes were steady, searching as if he was trying to read every thought racing through my mind. "I just need to know if you regret it." I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Did I regret it? The kiss had been everything I'd secretly imagined and feared it would be. Electric, overwhelming, impossible to take back. But regret? That wasn't the right word. "I don't regret it," I said finally, my voice trembling with the weight of the admission. "But I don't know where this leaves us." Adam's lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. "That makes two of us." The quiet between us stretched again, heavy with the things neither of us was ready to say. I felt exposed, like Adam could see every crack in the facade I'd spent so long building. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to run or hide. "Maybe we figure it out," he said after a moment, his hand brushing lightly against mine. "One step at a time." The simplicity of the suggestion caught me off guard. It was the kind of thing that should have felt impossible, considering the enormity of what had just happened. But somehow, coming from Adam, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt manageable. I nodded, my breath catching as his fingers intertwined with mine. "Okay," I said, the word barely audible. He smiled then, the warmth in his expression melting some of the tension that had been coiled tight in my chest. "Okay," he echoed. For a while, we just stood there, neither of us moving as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The soft, golden light bathed the patio in warmth, casting long shadows across the furniture we'd just finished assembling. It was a quiet, stolen moment, and I wanted to hold on to it for as long as I could. But reality, as always, had other plans. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the stillness, and I jerked back instinctively, my heart racing as if we'd been caught doing something forbidden. Adam's hand lingered on mine for a moment longer before he let go, his expression shifting into something more guarded. "That'll be Jake," he said, his tone casual, though his eyes still held that same quiet intensity. "We should probably—" "Yeah," I said quickly, cutting him off before he could finish. I stepped back, putting more space between us as I tried to steady my breathing. "We should." He didn't say anything else, just nodded before heading toward the door. I followed a few steps behind, the weight of the moment still pressing heavily on my chest. By the time we reached the front of the house, Jake was already unloading groceries from the trunk of his car. "Hey," Jake called out, flashing us a grin. "You guys get the furniture set up?" "Yeah," Adam replied, his voice calm and even. "It's all done." "Perfect. Thanks, man." Jake turned to me, his smile widening. "And thanks to you too, Chris. I owe you one." "Don't worry about it," I said, forcing a small smile. My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. "It was no big deal." Jake didn't seem to notice my discomfort, already distracted as he headed inside with an armful of bags. Adam lingered on the porch for a moment longer, his gaze flicking toward me before he followed Jake inside. He didn't say goodbye, but the brief glance he gave me felt like a conversation all its own. I stayed outside for a long time after they were gone, leaning against the porch railing as the sky shifted from gold to deep orange. My thoughts were a tangled mess, every emotion vying for my attention all at once. What had I done? What had we done? And where could we possibly go from here? That night, sleep was out of the question. I tossed and turned for hours, my mind replaying every moment of the day in excruciating detail. Adam's touch, his voice, the way he'd looked at me, it was all burned into my memory, impossible to escape. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But there was no avoiding the day ahead. I'd promised Jake I'd stop by again to help him with some yard work, and backing out now would raise too many questions. When I arrived at Jake's house, the tension in my chest was unbearable. I didn't know if Adam would be there, and the uncertainty made my stomach churn. Jake greeted me at the door with his usual easygoing grin, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Thanks for coming, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Adam's already out back getting started." My heart sank and soared at the same time. Of course, he was here. I nodded mutely, following Jake through the house and out to the backyard. Adam was crouched near the garden, pulling weeds with a focused expression. He looked up when he heard us, his eyes briefly meeting mine before flicking away. "Chris," he said, his tone polite but distant. "Morning." "Morning," I replied, my voice barely audible. The hours that followed were excruciating. Jake chattered on about nothing in particular, blissfully unaware of the tension between Adam and me. We worked in near silence, the unspoken weight of yesterday's kiss hanging heavily between us. At one point, Jake went inside to grab drinks, leaving Adam and me alone. The air grew thicker, the quiet between us deafening as we avoided looking at each other. "I wasn't expecting you to come today," Adam said finally, his voice low. "Neither was I admitted. But Jake asked, and I didn't know how to say no." He nodded, his hands still working the soil. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you did." I didn't know how to respond to that. My chest tightened and I turned away, focusing on the task in front of me. But even as I worked, I could feel Adam's gaze on me, the weight of his presence impossible to ignore. When Jake returned, the moment passed, but the tension lingered, following me home like a shadow. And as the days turned into weeks, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had started between Adam and me wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Every moment stretched long and thin, every interaction with Adam charged with something I couldn't define but couldn't ignore. We didn't talk about the kiss. We didn't need to. It lingered between us like a secret too fragile to name, shaping the way we moved around each other, the way our eyes met and held just a fraction too long. Jake, oblivious as ever, continued to rope the two of us into his plans. Another project here, a casual hangout there. Each time I told myself it was fine, that I could handle being around Adam without falling apart, but every time I left a feeling like my chest was tied in knots, my thoughts a tangled mess. It wasn't until a week later that everything came to a head. Jake had invited me over to watch a game, as he often did, and I arrived expecting the usual: beer, takeout, and his running commentary on every play. But when I walked in, Adam was there, sitting on the couch with one leg stretched out casually and a beer in hand. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, my pulse quickening. Jake, standing in the kitchen, waved me over. "Grab a beer and get comfortable," he said. "I've got to make a quick run to the store. Be back in 20. "Sure," I said, my voice tight. And just like that, we were alone again. The silence was immediate and heavy, punctuated only by the faint sound of the pregame commentary on the TV. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, the distance between us feeling both necessary and unbearable. I could feel Adam's gaze on me, but I kept mine fixed firmly on the screen. "You're avoiding me," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. I flinched, my hand tightening around the beer bottle. I'm not. You are, he said, shifting slightly to face me. You've barely looked at me all week. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. My chest felt tight, my thoughts a jumble of fear, frustration, and something else I couldn't quite name. Chris, Adam said, his tone softer now. Talk to me. Please. The plea in his voice broke something in me. I set the beer down and turned to face him, my jaw tight. What do you want me to say, Adam? That I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night? That I don't know what the hell I'm doing or how to handle this? Yes, he said simply. I want you to say whatever you're feeling, because I've been thinking about you too, and I'm tired of pretending I haven't. His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. I stared at him, my heart pounding as he leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. There was no smirk this time, no teasing glint in his eyes, just raw, unfiltered honesty. I like you, Chris, he said, his voice steady. I've liked you for a while now, and I know this is messy and complicated, but I don't care. I just want to know if you feel the same. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The truth was right there on the tip of my tongue, but fear held me back. Fear of what this meant, of what it would change, of the risks we were taking. But then Adam reached out, his hand brushing lightly against mine, and the fear began to melt away. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. It reminded me of the way he'd held me that night, the quiet intensity of it. I do, I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. I feel the same. Relief flickered across his face, followed quickly by something warmer, softer. He didn't say anything else, just shifted closer, his hand moving to cup my jaw. His touch was tentative, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it was slower this time, less frantic but no less intense. The kiss was soft and searching, a quiet exploration that felt like it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. My hands found their way to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and he responded in kind, his fingers threading through my hair. Time seemed to stop as we sank into each other, the world outside the living room fading into nothing. The kiss deepened, and with it came a flood of emotions, relief, longing, fear, and a quiet, undeniable joy. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads resting together, I let out a shaky laugh. Jake's gonna kill us if he walks in right now. Adam chuckled, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. Then let's not tell him just yet. I smiled, the tension in my chest easing slightly. Deal. We stayed there for a while longer, our hands still entwined, the quiet between us no longer heavy but comforting. And as I looked into Adam's eyes, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. This wasn't going to be easy. There were questions to answer, fears to face, and lines to navigate. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because for the first time, I knew I wasn't alone.